Welcome everyone to Dive In Festival 2021. Now in its 7th year, we have over 145 events that will be hosted both virtually and physically. This year's theme is active allyship. The past few years have seen major breakthroughs in diversity and inclusion and inspired many important conversations. This year's festival will focus on acting on those conversations and standing up for what is right, allowing us to accelerate the pace of change. Good afternoon, my name is Paul and I'm your host for this event, How to Create Allyship, a heart-to-heart talk on strategies and ideas. I'm joined today by two great speakers who will shortly introduce themselves. I'm honoured to represent my company, Chubb. Chubb is the largest globally listed property and casualty insurer operating in over 54 countries, and our success is down to our wonderful, diverse global workforce of over 33,000 colleagues. This year at Chubb, we are moving from dialogue to action through the implementation of initiatives including mentoring circles, intentional inclusion, race matters toolkits, inclusive hiring toolkits, bystander training. By having active allies at Chubb, we aim to create an environment where everyone is able to be their true selves and maximize their potential. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to Elizabeth. Good afternoon, Elizabeth. It's great to have you participating today.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Elizabeth, and I am representing AIG, which is also one of the world's largest insurance companies within property and casualty. It's
good to be on the same side of the fence today, Elizabeth.
Exactly. So representing plus 60 countries and jurisdictions across the world, definitely by nature a diverse company. I sit here today because I also think as AIG, I'm really proud of the AIG's diversity, equity and inclusion agenda. Peter Zaffino, our CEO, set out on a journey to be industry leading in diversity, equity and inclusion. So that's an aim, and we recognize we're not there yet. But in light of that aim, last year in 2019, a global board was set for AIG on diversity, equity, inclusion to actually hold the global leadership accountable and secure that there's action behind the intentions. I sit on that global board representing Europe, and I can say there's a vast activity agenda in AIG from our very strong culture on ERGs, which are employee resource groups. We have 145 employee resource groups across all countries with focus on women and allies, working families, LGBT plus, and so on. Aside from that, we also have mentorship groups, accelerated leadership development programs to help underrepresented groups accelerate representation, and monthly diversity, equity and inclusion themes, and many more activities going on that we hopefully can touch upon during today. And with that,
Absolutely.
Over to Medea.
Hi, yes.
Good afternoon, Medea.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for inviting me and giving this opportunity to be part of the big discussion about diversity and inclusion and how to be an ally. I'm from Kennedy's law firm, which is a global law firm. We are represented in about 37 countries all over the world, with about 2,300 employees of every kind from every walk of life. So we are truly diverse by nature. We like to think so, at least, and we are also simply because we're in so many places of the world. And a few years back, top management of Kennedy's decided to really work seriously with diversity and inclusion. We figured that we were a global firm and we needed to reflect that also in the way we work together, the way we structure our recruitment processes, and we wanted to be sure that we also reflect the communities that we work in, and that we reflect our customers and our clients in the way we work. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is a little bit about how you can work with being an ally. And for us at Kennedy's, that means actually how you can work with diversity and inclusion on a strategic level, and what it takes as a corporation to be an ally, because I guess we can all be allies individually, and we should be, but you can also be an ally as a corporation by the way you structure your work or the framework you set up for your employees and your clients, and the way you approach diversity and inclusion. So we've worked with that. Started out perhaps a bit rusty a few years back, but now we have regional committees who are dedicated to working with diversity and inclusion in each region, the APAC, EMEA, US, South America, and the UK. And what we wanted to do is really to create a safe place for people to work, a place where everyone can feel welcome, a place where we recruit the most talented people, no matter where they come from, no matter the sexuality or the color of the skin or their socioeconomic background. We wanted to ensure that we have a big talent pool so we can attract people, and that they feel safe and welcomed when they work for Kennedy's. So those were sort of the headlines. And I can talk a lot about the work we've done, but I guess we can take that as a next step, Paul. So back to you.
I think you're mute.
Sorry, thanks a lot, Medea, for the introduction. Thanks, Elizabeth. Just a reminder for the audience that you can leave a question in the chat function. We may not be able to answer all the questions, but we'll do our best. Before we go into more details about what we're doing on a company level, I'd just like to ask each of you, what is it from your personal perspective when you hear the word allyship? What does it mean if you just take yourself out of the corporate world for a moment and look at it from an individual perspective, Elizabeth? What's your sort of personal view on this? And how do you move from your own environment, personal environment with allyship into the corporate world?
Yeah, for me, allyship is really about dialogue. It's about discussing together how we can create a more inclusive environment. And that's both in the workplace and socially. So I think it's about speaking up about the biases you see, the prejudice you see, the assumptions you see, that both, sometimes I think they are rarely actually intended, but they are quite sort of strongly rooted in our cultures. So I think that dialogue is really what allyship is about. And I think when you then take it into a corporate context, it's very much about being aware of those biases and those differences, realizing our own privilege, realizing others' privilege, and also the difference between the people we see, and then actually take action. And here I agree with Medea. It's also about strategic action to actually change these things. So for me personally, it's a lot about dialogue. In a corporate sphere, I think it's a lot about putting action behind the words and actually build strategy to change things.
Great. And Medea, how do we put actions behind the words? Because we've all been in corporate culture for a while. We're very good at words, right? We're very good at telling a story. We're not always so good at actually taking action on those words or on those stories. So how do we go about doing that in this context?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And in the last sort of global D&I meeting we had, at Kennedy's, we talked about now it's time to do some implementation, because as you said, Paul, it's very easy to just sit around and talk. We need to implement and do something. And what you can do is you can, well, on a corporate level, there are lots of things you can do. You can work with your recruitment. You can say, well, every time that we put up, every time we're looking for a new recruit, we need to make sure that we are not biased in the way we draft the. I'm looking for a word here. The way we draft the advertisements. So that's just one simple thing. Look at the language that you use. Make sure it's not biased, and there are lots of professionals out there that are really good at making sure that there are no biases in your recruitment process. So that's really one very not simple action, but sort of hands-on action you can do. The way you hold meetings when you have a team meeting, whether it's on management level or a regular team meeting, make sure that everyone have their say. Make sure that everyone is allowed to and dare to say something, speak up at a meeting. You know, if someone sits in the corner and doesn't really say something, it might be because they're too shy, or it might be because there's another person at the table that, is very outspoken and extrovert. So make sure everyone gets to say, ask people the question, well, what do you think about this? Maybe this person have an excellent idea, but it's just not really used to maybe saying things aloud at a meeting with lots of other people. So there are also small things that you can do, like when you have customer events, maybe don't put your events at the end of the day, but rather around lunch. This will allow people who have parental responsibilities to leave the office at 4 or 5, or whenever they leave the office and pick up their kids. If they have to go out to customer events every night or every second night, it can be difficult if you have children at the same time. One of the things we have found in the survey we did that, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, is that lots of us have kids, and we have to pick up our kids after school or after kindergarten, and there have to be time for that. Obviously, don't stress people with making a lot of arrangement late in the afternoon, or set up important meetings from 4 till 5 in the afternoon. So lots of things that you can do to be an ally, to allow people to be themselves at work and have a private life, whatever their priorities are.
It sounds good, Medea. What I'm wondering though is, it takes, I guess, what's your view on leadership to drive this, right? Because all these actions sound wonderful, and people can initiate these themselves, but it needs to come from the top. You both sit on global D&I committees. How do you see that, the leadership role being so pivotal in these actions that you just spoke about?
Well, you're right. It does need to come from the top. That there have to be role models that takes the diversity agenda seriously, and not just as a tick box exercise. So you have to have support from top management that really thinks that this is a good idea and can see the point. And what we often discuss is exactly, what is the point? Why do we do this? Do we do this to look good, or do we do this because it makes sense, business-wise or financially? And it does make sense. I guess it's a bit of both. It's a bit of everything. It does make sense business-wise, because especially around attracting talent and making people feel welcomed at the workplace, then they can do their best. They can speak up. They can be creative. They can come up with new ideas. But yeah, there has to be a role model person, or there have to be someone in top management that really genuinely supports diversity and inclusion, and is an ally herself or himself.
Starts at the top, I think, right? And then it cascades down through the organization. And Elizabeth, I know that you have a background in human resources. How do you see it from a human resources perspective rather than sort of from a business leader perspective? We touched on earlier, Medea mentioned like advertising for roles and job descriptions, and how we can be more inclusive the way that we word those the way that we market ourselves. How do you see it from a human resources background?
Well, actually, I think human resources has a huge role to play in this because they are actually the guardians of many of the HR processes, the processes that, either a hinder or a facilitator for more diversity and inclusion. And that's both recruiting, as Medea mentioned, it's also promotion, it's also salary, it's also access to projects, interesting job swaps, whatever, talent programs, leadership programs, you name it. Often human resource sits actually on all those processes and has quite a control, right? So in our Global Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Board, human resources is quite heavily represented, and that's because they're actually the executors on lots of what's discussed in the board. They are the ones that's going to put up the framework so we always have a diverse slate, for instance, for recruiting. So I think, they have a huge executive role in actually getting this done. But they can't do it alone. And this is also, it has to come from, as you say, from the top. The message has to be, there has to be a clear ambition about doing something different than we did yesterday. And there has to be support from the business. Otherwise, it's just going to be, HR in their Eiffel Tower figuring out something they think is great. So I actually think the support or the importance that this is important from the core of the business, that is pivotal for change to happen.
So
how is it at ARG?
Well, yeah, I mean, we drive it. We drive it both from the top through the organisation, but actually, I completely agree with you. HR is all about execution, right? It's all about taking these initiatives and making sure that we're driving it through the organisation. But none of this can be done in isolation. It requires everyone, different levels of the organisation, different departments, all to be working as one to get the initiatives out into the business, but also to execute it. And I think what I'm curious about is at AIG, sitting on the Global Diversity Committee, you're talking with the theme this year is about going from dialogue to action, right? So you've got a lot of intelligent, clever people that want to make change. So how have you structured your conversations in that committee or at Kennedy's to take that from the board level dialogue into actually down the organisation through the different levels, through to HR, and to start to get some of these ideas implemented? Because at the beginning, I mentioned a couple of things that Chubb are doing. I think both of you also mentioned a few initiatives this year that you're all doing. So how do you actually take those from the board level and implement them through the layers of the organisation and then measure the success of them?
Yeah, so I actually think the last point you have, the measuring of success, is really key, that we actually set up some targets that we want to achieve. If it's representation in leadership groups, that we have, an idea about what is representation. Is that one person with a different gender, or is it that there's actually, a multiple faceted representation? So I agree with you. It starts with actually having something to measure against. When it comes to representation, we use industry and numbers as our benchmark. So being above industry numbers. And the same goes for salary. I mean, not that there we use, we want to be equally salaried. And if there's diversity, and there is a difference, then that gap is quite clear, right? And quite sort of explicit to work with. I think actually you have to be conscious that there's things happening at the top of the house or globally, and that will take a little bit of time to sieve down a huge organization as AIG, and that can't stand alone. So for that reason, you also need local activity, which is often much faster implemented, much faster because the agility of the local organization is often higher. So you need that dynamic of both happening, right? Both the vision and the talk from the top and the ambition of with numbers and wanting to measure and make a difference. And then actually, I think these local initiatives are just as important because they actually, and they have to sort of come together at some stage. They will come together.
Absolutely. And Madeira, from a Kennedy's perspective, I just mentioned before about some ally programs that we're all doing within our respective organizations. What success have you seen from these ally programs that Kennedy's been running over the last couple of years?
Well, what we have done first and foremost is set up those regional D&I groups and try to get the talk about being an ally rooted in the regions and, more importantly, perhaps also locally. So, and what we've done a survey, we've done a global survey to sort of find out what are actually the issues, and they can vary from region to region and from global or from local office to local office or country to country. So in one region, gender issues may be sort of the predominantly important issue. In other regions, it can be sexuality, or in a third region, it can be race. So we're trying to figure out what the most important discussions are or issues in each country, and then start from there. Because instead of top management deciding, well, we think these are the important 3 issues, we try to figure out what does the employees think are the important issues, and how can we work with that, and how can we support them in creating allyship between each other. And because we think that this will make the allyship or the diversity and inclusion not just a tick box exercise, but because we have to find a way to engage people, and we can only engage people if they feel that their problems are being taken seriously. And one thing we did find was that escalation of harassment issues were very important to people. Not that it, luckily, it doesn't happen that often, but we do have to have a mechanism in place where you can escalate in a safe way whatever issue you believe needs, the attention of HR or even the board if necessary. So that's something that can be done. Just figure out what's going on locally. What are the problems really? What are people's top 3 concerns locally, and then work from there, and make sure there's a way to escalate any issue that might pop up.
It's a good point with escalation. I mean, what's your view on escalation procedures? Not necessarily about Kennedy's, but in general, do you think colleagues out there feel comfortable enough to generally escalate serious concerns that they may have with diversity and inclusion in organizations?
That is a very big question. And I think it's probably the replies you'll get it will be different from whoever you ask, but it is important that there is a safe and perhaps also anonymous way of escalating, or a whistleblower regime. I think as a big company or a big corporation, you have to have some sort of safe way where you can escalate problems to either HR, or if not to HR, then to perhaps a separate entity. And there have to be confidentiality. I think confidentiality is also a key word here.
Yeah, I think
also think this is.
Sorry, Lisbeth.
No, but I just think this is one of the subjects where you actually see the most movement, also post Me Too and that movement. That people actually, there's a step change here going on from sticking up with it to not at all, right? And of course there's variation on that scale where we are from country to country, region to region, but there's a general trend that it's going to be easier to escalate, and people are going to escalate faster and more issues. I'm quite convinced that's going to happen. I also remember doing harassment training for employees 15 years ago, and people thought, that was more of a ritual. We had to do that. Then, and it would never be necessary to ever, escalate anything. And that has actually changed over those 15 years quite significantly. So
Yeah, the reason why I asked that, and I appreciate your insights into that, is because, as I said, the theme is about going from dialogue to action this year. And I sense globally, not just in job, but worldwide in different industries, speaking to friends and other colleagues, that actually where the real action is coming from is in the escalation process. I think, yes, we've been doing roundtables and mentoring and all these other fantastic programs, which we really require. But I think we are building a infrastructure slowly but surely around being able to have a solid escalation process where people feel safe to escalate it. So I sense that this year and going forward, dialogue to action, this is one of the important outcomes that we're seeing.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and escalation is a way of bringing forward issues that you may not even have thought about or even have heard about. It was if you don't escalate a problem, it looks like it doesn't exist at all, but obviously it also has to be taken seriously. Then there has to be a result. The escalation have to result in something, either a new policy or just the ability to talk about problems in the open, harassment, for example.
Agree.
Other than, I mean, if you don't, yeah, no, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask. Some people are not yet there in terms of being comfortable with escalation process. So they may want to look for an ally to support them in whatever they're going through, in having further dialogue about their particular situation that they're facing. How do you, if you want to be an ally to people that may need an ally, for whatever the reason is, how do you go about doing that in an organization like Kennedy's or AIG?
Do you want to?
I
can say
well,
we. So.
Go ahead, Maria.
Okay, we haven't formalized being an ally in terms of when to escalate or when you escalate. If you can, then if you have someone there who can hold your hand. Actually, what we're trying to set up the more formal process. But I think, having said that, each and every one of us have the responsibility to be there for our coworker, and by creating an environment where it's possible and safe to speak up and say, or to say to your colleague, well, I actually have this issue. I have problems at home, or I feel that I wasn't promoted because of my gender or because of my religion or whatever. And I think if we all just conscious that we are open-minded and can have that talk with our co-workers, then that's a very big first step. So, but creating an atmosphere where you can have that talk with your co-worker is key, and then making sure, I don't know how you can make sure that everyone is open-minded and just kind, really, and able to have a decent conversation or with your coworker with whatever problem they may want to discuss.
I actually think this is a key criteria for modern leadership, that you can be that. I mean, that's a success criteria, right? maybe a personal success criteria, that people feel comfortable coming to you with escalation points. That you manage to create an environment where that's doable. And in that sense, that's also, actually putting discussion into action. I think if we as a company, if AIG, go on. No, I was just thinking if AIG as a global company is going to succeed with their quite ambitious diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda, it requires that leaders across AIG actually takes that on as an ambition.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that the modern leader should have allied skills. So in essence, people feel comfortable going to their leader to raise these issues rather than maybe to a colleague or somewhere else, right? So the modern leader should have this skill set.
Yeah, and I recognize.
I think that's a very important point too.
Inbred, but you have to work on it, right?
Yes, and working on. I know at Chubb we have some allied programs for leaders that are very popular, and after that you're qualified as a ally leader, and hopefully at some point we can roll that through the entire organization. But it takes more than just training. And have you seen examples of this in your daily work with leaders that are demonstrating this? Either of you? Open question.
Yeah. Well,
sorry.
I've actually seen multiple examples. But I mean, I've seen examples from leaders speaking up about injustice of how we treat certain groups, to actually just leaders implementing bias training for the whole organization, and both are ways of trying to push that agenda. But I can't, and maybe I also have some examples of individuals who have actually really benefited from a dialogue with their leader. I think they are much more difficult to discuss, right? So
yeah, of course, yes. But I was looking for the traits that you see in a modern day leader being an ally. How do they express themselves? How do they make themselves available at the same time being a leader, but also being an ally?
One of the leaders I really admire at AIG has, for instance, been quite open about, other personal challenges. And I think that's one way to actually, to be inclusive and be open, that it's not a you and me, but it's us. We all have things we deal with.
Yeah, if I can just chip in, I think that's quite important that you, like our senior manager, Suzanne Liversidge, has been very open about her personal experience being a gay woman, and that has sort of trickled down in the whole organization, where we're all becoming a little bit more open about who we are really as human beings, and we're not just professionals. We are professionals, but we're also human beings, and we have our faults and issues and whatever, and we sometimes take those to work as well. And but being open about it is really, really important. But then I do also think that being an ally and being more open-minded is something you can train. It's not necessarily rocket science. It is actually something you can train and measure, and some are better than others, but you can do something about it. You can learn from others, and you can take courses, and there are lots of things where you can actually train your biases and work on being an ally.
That's a great segue into one of the questions we have, Madeira, which is reads, how do you educate yourself in this topic, right? So I think you just touched on a few. Do you have any others to share?
Well, Google is a wonderful place, isn't it? So So no, actually, if you Google how to be an ally or can I be an ally, you'll have hundreds of hits and you can read a lot about it. But obviously, what we have done is formalized training on biases. I think Elizabeth just mentioned that as well. You can as a corporation formalize your training and draw on various experts or have your HR representatives educate themselves, and then they can educate further in the management group, etc. So there are lots of ways that you can educate yourself on diversity and inclusion or allyship, definitely.
Elizabeth, any input on this from you?
Yeah, well, I actually think for me, just being in the dialogue, pushing myself into the sphere of discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion is so educating in its own right. That's my best advice is, get yourself into those conversations because they are, and do it with an open mind because you will learn a lot. And I'm just thinking there's lots of literature, right, that's really worth reading as well, aside from Google. Also, fiction. And I could just give the recommendation, Girl, Woman, Other, which is a fantastic book, which just came out this summer, or actually autumn, which is both a good read and quite educative on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Great tip. Thank you. From my perspective, I'm not really into Google. I think it's good, and there's a lot of information there. But I find on this particular topic, it's just diving in, right? Getting hands-on experience, being involved with people that have had great experiences that they can share with me, participating in events like this, trying to broaden my perspectives a little bit. That seems to be what's working for me at this point. One of the other questions we have. This broadcast is coming from the Nordics, all three of us. I think we're all in 3 different Nordic countries at the moment. The question reads, what are the main D&I challenges in the Nordics in 2021? And I mean, we're not talking about here necessarily our companies, but in general, what's your view on that, Elizabeth, to start with?
Well, I think we actually have quite a challenge in the Nordics also on ethnic inclusion. If I just look at my own Nordic leadership board, we are quite fairly well represented, both female and male. We are all around the same age, plus minus 5 years, but we are quite sort of same skin color, same background. So I think that's definitely somewhere where we are not as developed. Maybe because we have we have lately having to take stance on some of these or discuss some of these issues. But I definitely think we have a way to go there. Then of course there's issues on pay parity. Which is, has been for years and still hasn't been closed. If you look at top C-suite, there's also, of course, gender issues, especially when it comes to boards. So I think where there's a lot of things that's still worth discussing and where we still have quite a way to go.
Nadira, thanks, Elizabeth. What's your view on this?
I agree with Elizabeth. I think actually one of the dangers in the Nordic is that we sometimes feel a little bit too comfortable believing or thinking that we have equality amongst the, especially gender equality, or that there is no pay gap, but there is, and we still have quite a way to go with respect to gender equality on top management level, at least. So one of the big discussions right now in Denmark, at least, is on maternity/paternity leave, whether men should take a larger part of the parental leave, make it a paternity leave, or not. So there's still quite, and when you have that discussion, all sorts of biases come up. And it's really interesting to listen to and quite eye-opening at times as well. But having said that, I think racial and racial background, religious background are probably where we in the Nordics are still biased in many ways, and there are still people who need to fight a little more to get where they want to go, if their skin is a different color than sort of the usual pale.
The blonde hair,
Yeah.
pale skin.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking forward a little bit, 5 years' time in the Nordics, what would you like to see?
Another good question. I think actually, hopefully, with religious and cultural background, I hope that we have moved forward, because we are seeing more and more people with diverse background coming through universities. So the level of education amongst immigrants are definitely, really on the rise, and that should hopefully have an impact in 5-10 years times. That for me personal, that's the place where I would like to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Medea. I think that's really important. Then I actually also think, to your point, I hope we get a little bit less full of ourselves and actually dig into the issues that are there and take them serious. I think you are right. We have in the Nordics a sort of a challenge with an understanding of us being nearly world leading on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that can be a hinder in actually getting into some candid discussions on things we need to improve. So, I see this change a lot with the younger generation. They're much more in recognition of all the things that still needs to be changed, and much more verbal around it. So I'm full of hope. In 5 years, they will be conquering the world market, or the labor market.
Great. And mentioned before that you both sit on global D&I committees, and as Nordic representatives or European representatives, but coming from Nordic countries, do you ever receive any comments around, well, there's not many issues going on in the Nordics? Because one of my personal experiences is, D&I in the Nordics, I mean, most advanced D&I in the world, right? What do you need to worry about? And I think you touched on some really relevant points there about where we are now, where we want to go in 5 years. But I'm just curious to hear if you've come across that sentiment as well.
I think the Nordics is too small.
It's not like someone had said.
For that to be a global recognition, I think it's more a Nordic recognition that we are ahead of the game than a global recognition. So it's rare that I get that comment from the global board, but locally, I could get that comment.
Yeah. I agree, absolutely.
But yeah. I think the fact that we are perceived as being ahead of the curve in the Nordics, or we perceive ourselves, doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of work still to do, right? As you just highlighted. I think our challenges may be somewhat different to, say, North America, for example, right? In terms of what we are trying to achieve. So overall, I think we're all heading in the same direction. I have another question that's popped up, a good one. Do you have a personal story of being an ally or sharing a personal experience as a leader? Do you have a personal story of being an ally or sharing a personal experience as a leader? And Elizabeth, I'm thinking about from your human resource background, also as a business leader. I mean, in human resource, you probably were an ally to a lot of in a lot of ways on a very frequent basis. But then moving into more of a business role, how does that change, and what type of different experiences have you had?
Yeah, well, I don't, I think it's always difficult to talk about, this is where I was a fantastic ally. But it's something I strive to be. And what I do is, for instance, I have several mentorships with people that, either that has ambition and wants to drive their career forward, but somehow feel stuck where they are, or, so I think, and I was actually also quite sort of aware of the next step of actually being a sponsor of certain people and actually advocate for their next role, and try to think of that actively. So that's one way of being an ally. I sometimes also volunteer to read people's CV when they're looking for new jobs, because I've got lots of experience in that, and I think that's one way of helping people on to their next career. So I do things like that. Is that a great ally? Is that a personal story? Well, it's at least personal, but I'd rather have somebody else judge whether that's if it's of benefit.
Well, I think it sounds a good one, helping people with CVs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a door opener, right? And you need to get that right. So I think that's a good one to have. And Medea, in your experience?
Yeah, like Elizabeth, I hope other peoples will judge me on this, but in a positive way. One thing that does spring to mind was a situation where one of my younger colleagues had really done a terrific job in developing some new business, and I felt she didn't quite get the credit for it. I don't think I say she because it was a woman, but I really, to be honest, I don't think that was the reason why she didn't get enough credit for what she had done. But I spoke up for her and said, well, actually, this was her. Our success is due to her work and no one else's work, really. So I just said that to the one who needed to hear it, and that worked out quite well. So it's not that it was a gender issue or anything, but maybe just sometimes you just need to make sure that whoever deserves to be mentioned as someone who's successful or who did a good job is also a way of being an ally, I guess.
Correct. Yes, I agree with that. And I think if we look at the future, there's a question that just came up in relation to promoting allyship around D&I. And what future plans do you see for yourself? And I mean, let's take this, I think, on a personal basis rather than on our corporate basis. And I'm just thinking from my perspective. I mentioned before how I'm not really into reading material, but I'm more into doing. And one of my goals for this year is to be more actively involved in events like this and to roll my sleeves up and really get in and understand more about people's stories, right? Because I think people's stories are so powerful and we learn a lot from them. And so I'm really looking forward to trying to move that forward on my own personal agenda. I mean, what about yours, Elizabeth? What's your sort of future plans if you look for the rest of the remainder of this year into next year?
Well, I think I have a couple of people that, as I mentioned, mentor, and I think that's. I actually also have a couple of mentor groups. I think that's where I really. I mean, I think it's actually a dual pleasure because I also get I learn so much. I get so many stories. So maybe it's actually a reverse mentorship more than. But I think that's a thing I want to continue doing because that actually gives me, it keeps me on my toes on my learning path of the challenges that are out there. And then I think, I mean, this is, I think the older I grow, the more honest I also get around what I see. And I think using that honesty is actually, I'm going to get even better at that.
I just want to test your honesty. Do you think we're good enough at listening to people's stories? Do you think we take time out as leaders in organizations to listen to people's stories and to understand where they're coming from? Or you still think we have a long way to go?
Well, I don't know if we have a long way to go, but we still have a way to go. I think we're getting better. I think we are getting better. I think we should be, it should be more internalized. This is what we should also be doing.
Agree. Yeah. Okay. Madeira, I have a question here.
Yeah.
This is a good one as well. There's some great questions coming through, so thank you for those questions. What is your biggest success as a company to endorse the DE&I agenda if you should choose one?
That is a good question, a big one.
It's a big one, yeah. We
I
need
think
another hour for that one, I think.
yeah. I think actually the survey that we did, where we tried to ask everyone in our organization, further sort of just collecting data, who are they, and age, gender, etc., but also just asking about their sort of general feeling about what do they think are the most important issues, and we got some really great responses, and also some quite perhaps surprising responses in some of the regions. But at least we got the feeling that this is really something that's on people's mind, and people are interested in working with diversity and inclusion if they get the opportunity to speak up and join. And so I think that's a success for me, is to just find out that most of my co-workers and colleagues around the world are actually quite interested in these subjects. So that's a positive, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, good. Another question just popped in. Sorry, they're flying in now. Fast and furious. What would you recommend the first step is towards being an active ally? We talked a little bit about that, right? We talked about it. Also, ally being part of a leader incorporated. I think this may be more aimed at a colleague being a good ally. Any thoughts on that?
I think
you go ahead.
I think actually the first step of being a good ally, or towards being an ally, is realizing you need allies. All of us need an ally, and we are the ally of someone. We are all the ally of someone, right? And then activate that. Actually think about that, and then think, okay, what does that mean that I then could do differently? Is that actually setting up a group at work where we discuss flexible work hours? Is that or ethnicity challenges, or whatever is close to your heart? So start where it's close to your heart, and realize that you play a role in making a change.
Absolutely. I like the topic of flexible work hours. That's very trending right now, right? Medea, your views on this one?
I think being curious, actually, if you want to be an ally, be open and be curious, and perhaps more than looking for solutions, then ask your colleagues questions. What is really going on? Be curious and be ready to be challenged. I think challenged on your own biases, which can be really annoying sometimes. But be curious about that.
Yeah, I love the word curious. I think that's a really powerful word in the context of being an ally. Absolutely. We have just on 4 minutes left, so I would like to get your departing words of wisdom, starting with you, Elizabeth, on this important topic, going from dialogue to action. What's your final words of wisdom?
Well, that's a tough one. I think actually I actually think it starts with dialogue, and I do think it's super important to say out loud we want to make difference, and then of course it's concretizing those differences. And I think we had a lot of good examples during this conversation. I also wrote some down that I didn't, like customer events that you came up with, Medea, which hasn't been too much on my agenda, but I definitely see your point. So that's one of the things I'm taking away with me from just being in this conversation. And I think that's so it starts with the dialogue, and then we can action. I'm going to action on events.
It's exciting to action something, right?
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Medea, your words of wisdom.
I would say, you just don't be afraid of taking small steps at the time. Once you, as Elizabeth said, once you've set an agenda or a goal, then don't worry too much about doing it all at once. Small events or single events also count. Do one step at the time, and that is progress as well. It's okay to be ambitious, but don't be overwhelmed about all of the things that you could do and have to do and this and that, and you have to have your whole list. Just get started with small steps.
Absolutely.
Just do it.
I mean, yeah, I steal it from Nike. That was going to be my departing words. Is you've heard a lot of great content today, and I think it's just do it, like you said, Medea. Give it a go, right? What do you got to lose? Grab some energy from this and from other dive-in events during the next few days and weeks, and really get out there and just have a go at it. And like we said earlier, be curious. Being curious gets you a very long way when it comes to diversity inclusion and listening and wanting to hear people's stories. So, but a big thank you to both of you. You've been wonderful guests to have on this call today. Really appreciate it. Hopefully we can do it another time, and maybe in 5 years to see how we progressed and whether we're meeting your ambitions. I hope we do. So a little bit early to finish, but I think we can wind it up. Please, for the audience out there, don't forget there are other great events going on during the Dive In 2021 festival. So please check it out and participate as much as you can, and hope to see everyone soon on another event. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Take care, everyone.